Welcome again to Discovery class. Can you make out what I've got in my hand here? It's my jackknife. I've had it for years. And it's not much. It was almost taken away from me this week. Let me tell you what happened. I'm going to use it as a lead-in to what I'm going to talk about today. Mary and I had to go to the courtroom downtown in Calgary this week. We had to plead for a Form 8 to be signed by the judge in the courtroom, and the courtroom number was 1207. Form 8 is a legal document allowing the RCMP to come to your home and pick up someone mentally ill and deliver that one to the psych ward at the hospital. We got that form, the judge granted it to us, and our son, who's now been picked up, is now recovering at Lougheed Hospital. Now, I want to come back to my jackknife because it's important. When you enter the courtroom and the courthouse to see the judge, you have to pass through security at the front door. It's the same security check that you would pass if you're going into the airport. You must first empty your pockets, take off your watch and your belt, take off your shoes, put everything in a tub. And the officer takes those things and he puts them on a conveyor belt and they go through an X-ray machine. Well, the officer did that. And then as I was emptying my pocket, he saw my jackknife and he said, "Well, sir, you can't take that in there. Knives are not allowed in the courtroom. You're going to have to give that up." Well, you know, my heart broke because I've had that in my pocket since I was a little guy. And the irony is, it's just like a little old friend, and I had to talk to it, and I said, "Goodbye, pal. Thanks for all these years of service," and I let go of it, and I handed it in. Well, I walked through the X-ray arch, and I awaited my tub on the conveyor belt with all my other belongings. Attending the end of the belt on the other side was an elderly black officer, and he had been watching me go through all this event. And he watched his colleague take away my jackknife. And he said to me, "I can see that jackknife meant a lot to you. Would you like to have it come back?" Well, I said, "You can't." I said, "I'm going into the courtroom now, and they've taken it away from me, and how could I get it back?" He said, "I'm going to go up to the front of the conveyor belt where they placed it in their little lost and found, and I'm going to get it for you, and I'm going to bring it back to you. And what I want you to do is this. I want you to leave all your belongings in the tub, and I'm going to let you go out this little gate. And you go outside where you came in, and you'll find that there are some flower pots just outside the door. Tuck it in one of the flower pots, and when you go to the court and you're dismissed and you go out, pick it up as you leave." Well, class, you should have seen me. He gave me my knife, and I walked out the door leaving everything in the tub. I had no coat, no belt, no hat, no shoes, and I ran out exactly as I was, holding this in one hand, and in the other hand I was holding up my pants. And out the front door I went, and here I lost it, right in one of those flower pots. Why am I telling you this? Well, when I came back out, I gave an old wink to that old gentleman, and as I left, he had a smile on his face, and so did I, because my knife was waiting me outside the door. Today I want to talk about separation. This little guy and I were almost separated. Thanks to someone I didn't know, we're all back together again. My study text for today's class is Romans 8:35. Paul is writing from prison, and here's what he says. "Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall trouble, hardship, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, sword, or even death? No, in all these things we are more than conquerors You and I have been separated from each other with this coronavirus for now almost 8 months. I haven't seen you, you haven't seen me. And I want you to know I miss you. Here I am in our classroom again, and I'm talking to you in an empty room. But at least I'm talking to you, and I find that very painful, being separated. But you know what I believe? Little things are going to put us back together again. Just little things. I don't know what they're going to be, but little things are going to do it. It might be a virus vaccination. Wouldn't that be wonderful? They tell me Pfizer, the great American drug company, has now found one that's almost 90% pure. If that's the case, it's going to be available in the 1st of January. And maybe that's going to be the secret. I don't know. During World War II, a soldier was separated from his unit in a Pacific island in the battle. The fighting was very fierce. And in the smoke and in the crossfire, he had lost touch with his comrades. Alone in the jungle, he could hear the enemy soldiers coming in his direction. Scrambling for cover, he found a way up the high ridge, and he found several little caves there in the jungle. Quickly, he crawled inside of one of the caves, and it was only safe for a moment because he knew he would be caught and he'd be shot, and life would be over. As he waited there, he was a Christian and he prayed quietly. He said, Lord, the enemy is coming close. You know the enemy. You know where they are. Could you somehow rescue me? Could you separate me from them in a way that I can still live? As he quietly prayed that, he noticed something very different. Because at the mouth of the cave, up in the corner, was a little spider. And the little spider began to go to work building a cobweb over the front door of the cave. Have you ever watched a cobweb work? Well, all of you that are farm kids, you must have known that over top of the milk parlor, up there in the rafters, they were loaded with cobwebs. Did you ever watch one work? It's a miracle. They're really amazing little bugs. What they do, they have in their abdomen a big sac, and it's a fluid. And what they'll do is use that little fluid, just like a tiny little fire hose, and it'll shoot to wherever they want to put their start, and then they'll rappel all the way down on that cobweb to the bottom, and they'll leave that rope, which we call a cobweb, in place, and then they'll scamper back up, go around a bit, and then they'll go another direction. And then they'll go here, and then they'll go another direction. And it isn't very long before right in the center, they have a framework that they're beginning to work. And what it is really is a glorified tennis racket. And they'll go from here to here to here to here, and then round they'll go. And when they're done, they'll drop in another fraction, and then they'll do it all over again until finally it's all finished, and then they lodge in the middle, and that becomes their hunting ground for an insect that would be coming through the air, lodged on that cobweb, and that would be their meal. The soldier inside that cave watched that spider do his work. And when it was all finished, he was in the center, and just then the soldiers came. They were going in each one of the caves, and they turned their lights and they looked, and they came to his cave. He snuck in behind the boulders and he didn't move. The flashlight glimmered around, but then he could hear in a foreign language something saying, "There's been nobody in here. Look at the cobweb. There's been nobody in here for months." And off they went. A mere spider web had become greater than a brick wall in the salvation of that soldier. Little things put that soldier back with his comrade. And little things put that knife back in my pocket. Now go back to my text, Romans 8:35. What shall separate us from the love of Christ? Now remember the list. He gives trouble, hardship, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, sword, death. No, in all these things, the scripture says, We're going to be more than conquerors. Now go down to the last one on the list, death. How do you conquer that one? Well, let me show you. I want you to come with me into the Old Testament to a psalm that you may not be very familiar with. It's Psalm 91. The psalm is called the Jewish funeral psalm. In the ancient world, when a Jewish man or a Jewish woman died, his body was carried to the final resting place in the cemetery, and walking in front of the remains was a priest or a Levite, and they were quoting Psalm 91. They memorized it. And as they would walk, they would stop 7 times and repeat that psalm. And they would quote these words: "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." What was being said here to the family of mourners as they followed this deceased person? God has sheltered you on earth, and now you're going to be present with him in heaven. And the writer of Psalm 91 goes on and lists the dangers that are faced on earth. And we've all had them. He mentions traps, deadly pestilence, that's disease or famine, terror at night, arrows that fly by day, death that stalks in the darkness, plagues that destroy at midday. But then comes the separation. For all these things, even though we are separated, God uses the word will, W-I-L-L. And listen to what he says. He says, the Most High will be your dwelling place. The Lord will be your refuge. The Lord will cause you to have no harm before you. No disaster will come near you. His angels will guard you. The lion and the cobra will not harm you. And then at the end of the psalm comes this beautiful benediction. Picture it. The priest is watching the body be lowered in the grave. The mourners who have followed the casket to its final resting place hear these words of comfort coming from the priest's lips. I will rescue him. I will protect him. I will answer him. I will be with him. I will deliver him. I will honor him. I will satisfy him, and I will show him my salvation. Aren't those wonderful I wills? Did you know they're in the Bible? The Apostle Paul knew all about Psalm 91. He was a Pharisee, remember. He was trained under Gamaliel, one of the great professors of his day. He was a great Jewish scholar. He had memorized Psalm 91, I'm sure, many times, from the top to the bottom. And I believe Apostle Paul had done many funerals. He would have followed the procession into the cemetery, and he'd stop 7 times and he'd repeat what I just told you. However, the priests and the Levites, in doing this, they had a very fuzzy understanding of immorality or immortality. That's what happened when the person dies. What happens? All the neighbors of the ancient Jews were idolaters. They worshipped idols. They were man-made images that they thought would get them to heaven. Now, the Egyptians were the best of this because they buried all of their great kings and leaders in pyramids. You've seen them. They're still over there. I haven't seen one. I'd like to go one day. And inside these pyramids were hollowed burial chambers. They were mummified, the body, and along with the body, they buried their favorite horse, their chariot, their furniture, their dried fruit, their dog, their cat, their hunting gear, their clothes, even their wives, and their yacht if they had one on the Nile. They were all buried with him, but heaven was a place of darkness, and it was life after death that was very fearful. This fearfulness of the unknown was copied by the ancient Jews. They said, well, they worship that way? Maybe I should worship that way. But they were afraid of their God. Now remember, God was Yahweh. He was their God from the day they were called to be his children. Wild animals and insects, storms, famine, wild animals, they didn't bother. And then, as they began to think about what God was like, the Old Testament Jew, when he was thinking about immortality, why do I say that? Afterlife. What was this heaven supposed to be? How can I please this God so that I can live with him throughout eternity? Can you see the separation here in Psalm 91? Well, let me show you Psalm 91 of the New Testament, because it has its collation when you go across into the New. Paul is writing. And remember what he had said. He had memorized Psalm 91. With that in mind, he takes this psalm to a whole different level. When he'd lead a funeral procession in the New Testament, listen to what he'd repeat as he would walk by the gates of the cemetery into the final resting place. He writes in Romans 8, verse 37, "What shall separate us from the love of Christ?" And here he gives his list. Trouble, hardship, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, sword, death. It's almost the same, word for word, as you read in Psalm 91. In all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. And now comes these words which change everything. Paul writes, "I'm convinced that whether death or life, angels, demons, things present, future, any other powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation would be able to separate me from the love of God that's in Christ Jesus." Too bad the pharaohs of Egypt couldn't have heard that. Wouldn't that have been music in their ears if they had? Too bad the prophets of Baal during the time of Elisha couldn't have heard that. They wouldn't have sacrificed little children to their idols. Too bad the people of Calgary couldn't have heard that. They wouldn't be so fearful, I don't think, of the coronavirus that pitched itself at the gate of our city. Separation on our hearts of our people, I find, are all over the world. Tess was a little girl. She was a precocious 8-year-old when she heard her mother and dad talking about her little brother Andrew. All she knew was that he was very sick, and they were completely out of money. Only a costly surgery could save him now. There was no one to give them any money. They didn't have any money for surgery. She heard Daddy say to her tearful mother with whispered desperation, "Only a miracle can save him now." Tess went to her bedroom and pulled out a glass jar that she used for her little piggy bank, hiding in a place in the closet. She poured all the change on the floor and she counted it carefully. Placing the coins back in the jar and twisting on the cap, she slipped out the back door and made her way 3 blocks to the local pharmacy. She knew how to find it. She had gone with her mother many times to get a prescription. When she slipped into that pharmacy, she waited patiently for the pharmacist to give some attention. He was standing there with his white coat on, talking to another man who had a nice black suit and tie. She waited and waited for his attention. He didn't give it to her. She even annoyed him when she pulled his coat. And the pharmacist said, "Excuse me, little girl. Can't you see I'm busy? I'm talking to this man and he's my brother. He's come to visit me from Chicago. I haven't seen him in some time. And Would you just give me a few minutes to talk with him? Finally, the pharmacist, looking down in annoyance, looked at this little girl and said, "Lady, what would you like?" "I want to talk to you about my brother," Tess said. "He's really, really sick. And I want to buy a miracle." "I beg your pardon," said the pharmacist. "You want to what?" "I want to buy a miracle," said little Tess. Tess said, "I have a brother, his name is Andrew, and he has something growing bad in his head. And my daddy says that only a miracle can save him. So how much does a miracle cost?" she asked the druggist. "We don't sell miracles here, little girl," said the druggist. "I'm sorry, but I really can't help you," the pharmacist said, softening just a little. "Well, listen, I have the money to pay for it. If it isn't enough, I'll get the rest. Just tell me, how much would that miracle cost, do you think?" The pharmacist's brother was a well-dressed man. He stooped down and he asked the little girl, "What kind of miracle do you think your brother would need?" "I don't know," Tess said, her eyes welling up. "I just know he's really sick. And Mummy says he needs an operation. But my daddy can't pay for it. So I want to use my money to buy a miracle." "How much do you have?" asked the man from Chicago. She said, "I have $1.11, Tess answered, barely audible. "And it's all the money I have, but I know if I get at it and work, I can get some more." "Well, what a coincidence," smiled the man. $1.11. Do you know that's the exact price for a miracle for your little brother? He took her money in one hand, and with the other hand he took her hand, and they made their way back to the little girl's house. "I want to see your brother," he said, "and I want to meet your parents. Let's see if we have the kind of miracle that you need." That well-dressed man was Dr. Carrington Armstrong, the best neurosurgeon in Chicago. The operation was completed. The little boy was doing well, and the doctor didn't charge for his service. Tessa's mother said to her, "That surgery was a miracle. I wonder how much it cost." Tess said to her mother, "It cost $1.11. What little things are separating you? What little miracles do you want in the midst of all this mess that we're living in to be your miracle? How much do you think it would cost?" I wonder if one of you there has ever become a Christian. Why don't you let Christ come into your life? Why don't you begin brand new? It cost him everything. It doesn't even cost you $1.11. He will give it to you free. Why don't you accept him? Right now, you're living in a life of separation. Why don't you break the separation? Do you know his spirit can come in and you can have back your tiny little jackknife, and it didn't cost you anything. Christ's blood paid for that. It's free. I like to end my class with something from the sunny side of the street. Something that I can put a smile on your face before you go. There was a traveling salesman who was driving through the countryside and his car broke down. It was getting towards dark, and he left his car and he walked 1.5 miles to a farmhouse. And he knocked on the door and he said to the farmer what had happened. And he asked the farmer if he could spend the night there in the farmhouse. And the next morning he'd be on his way and fix his car. The farmer said, "You can stay the night, but you can't stay with us in the farmhouse. I have 3 daughters. They're not married. They take up the rooms that we have. But I'm going to give you some fresh bedding, and I want you to go to the barn. You can go up into the haymow, and there you'll be nice and safe, and you'll find it's comfortable and it's warm. And in the morning, come back to the kitchen, and I'll have breakfast for you." The traveling salesman did. And he went back into the barn, had his sleep, and in the morning he was there early, and the man had on bacon and eggs all waiting for him, the farmer did. The girls weren't up yet. And then the farmer asked the salesman, "Are you married?" He said, no, I'm not." Well, he said, "I have 3 daughters, and they're not married either. And my first daughter, she's 21 years old, and I promised her when she gets married, I'm going to give her $3,000. Now, my next daughter's a little older. She's 25, and when she gets married, I promised her $5,000. My oldest is 30. And when she gets married, she's getting $10,000. The salesman thought for a moment, and then he said to the farmer, "Tell me, is it possible that you'd have another daughter that's crowding 50? I have here my poppy. I'm doing this broadcast the day before Memorial Day. It's on Tuesday. I hope you wear your poppy proudly. You know, when I see a poppy and I can wear it during Memorial time, I'm always thinking of my relatives, some of them that died over there in the theater in Europe and also over in the Pacific. And I think of the joy and the privilege that I have living in Canada. It's a wonderful country, isn't it? I have been so blessed to raise my family, have you at Brentview as my family, have you in my class. And on this Memorial Day, I'm so grateful that I live in a place where I can have so much. And often I don't say thanks enough. So, will I see you next class? I'll look for you. Please come back. Can't wait to see you again.